Hey dudes, and welcome back to The Bants. As always, I am your host, The Bants, and it's finally Friday, the end of the week. But before we can get into the weekend, as per usual, we have our third and final whiff for the week. So let's just get right into it. And first up, of course, we have our headlines for the day. And in our first headline of the day, brand Comme des Garçons came together with retail giant Nordstrom's to come up with the first men's only Comme des Garçons store, and honestly, I think this is a fantastic idea. So basically what this means is that the Nordstrom store in NYC, New York City, will be having its very own in-store Comme des Garçons store. And in this store, they plan to stock the entirety of all of the men's lines from Comme des Garçons. So that's home, that's play, that's man, and that's even Gosha Rybczynski. For those of you who didn't know, that's part of CDG as well. And honestly, I think this is an absolutely fantastic idea. As we just talked about just a little while ago, menswear is trending to outsell women's wear this year. So the fact that we've seen so many brands start to shift towards a more menswear aesthetic, or menswear selling aesthetic, I guess you should say, I think this is right on trend with that, and I don't see why this would be anywhere near a bad idea. Then LVMH announced their newest initiative titled The House of Startups, and once again, another brilliant idea from the Louis Vuitton conglomerate. And basically what this initiative entails is that starting now and continuing every year, Louis Vuitton is going to find 50 brands that they consider worthwhile, and over the course of 6 months, they're going to help each brand grow and collaborate with their over 70 brands already. And although I do personally love this idea, it definitely does have its drawbacks as well. But as far as the pros go, there's definitely a ton more out there. I mean, when you think about it, you have a brand that is just on the rising end, still trying to bubble up, get grabbed up by Louis Vuitton, literally the biggest fashion conglomerate that exists at this point in time. And they help you out for 6 months behind the scenes, and they help you collaborate with a slew of their 70 plus brands. That's fucking incredible, in my opinion. Sure, of course, you do get the problem aspect of getting sucked into the LVMH conglomerate, but hey, I mean, if you can establish yourself enough as a designer, you can always move on from your first brand, and with the help that they give you and the ties and networking they give you in this experience, I mean, the sky's the limit from there, really. But either way, we really do have to give respect to LVMH for really doing their best at trying to push up these young designers in the industry, because nobody's doing as much as they are right now. Alright, and with our headlines out of the way, let's move on to our art stories for the day. And first up, the James Jarvis gallery that's been running in Hong Kong for a little while now has finally gotten a decent photo gallery up. So obviously here's a picture here, but if you do want to see more, definitely check out the link in the description. Then Juxtapose sat down for an interview with Serge Lowrider, and honestly, if you consider yourself a fan of kind of that old-fashioned hand-painted sign look, or maybe even a fan of just typography in general, I would definitely check out some of his work. Very interesting stuff. And lastly, Juxtapose also sat down for an interview with legendary graffiti artist Blade. So if you happen to be a fan of graffiti, and especially a history of graffiti, I would definitely give this article a look and read as well. Alright, and now moving on into fashion, Bape finally decided to re-release their fisheye full zip hoodie, and honestly, I don't know how to feel about it. Now, a lot of people seeing this for the first time have been screaming that it feels very unoriginal and very boring, but this is actually not a new design from Bape. This design comes back from 2007 when Nigo was still part of Bape, so don't blame this at least on the new designers. However, with that said, the fact that the fish eyes are screen printed on the hoodie this time, if my memory serves me correctly, the original fish eyes were stitched on just like the majority of all the other hoodies that they do that are full zip, like the tiger and the shark. So Feel free to call me out in the comments if I'm wrong about that, but if I am right, then you can blame the new designers on this faux pas. But just going back to the design in general, I will at least say this. Compared to a lot of other things that Bape has been doing recently, this is by no means that offensive. In all honesty, when it comes to the graphic here and the all over print, this kind of does feel like golden era Bape, if you will. Now that doesn't mean that I think it's either good nor bad. I think it's kind of somewhere in the middle, but at the very least, it's not terrible, so we at least have to give Bape that. Then Korean brand 51% showed off their Spring Summer 2018 lookbook, and unfortunately they got more wrong here than they got right. So let's start off with what they did right. I personally really enjoyed the graphics they decided to use here. I did like a lot of the more contemporary pieces they designed, and even as far as the patent leather goes, as far as somebody who really personally doesn't like patent leather in a lot of things, I thought all of those pieces that they did were actually pretty cool and pretty different compared to what you see a lot of other brands using material-wise nowadays. But with all of that out of the way, now let's move on to the bad, which unfortunately is the majority of this lookbook, and the reason behind that is because they fucked up the techwear. Why, oh why did you have to go and fuck up the techwear? You see, even though techwear isn't necessarily as popular as it used to be, and even though for a lot of people it came off as goofy and kind of cosplaying as such, one thing you have to understand about people that are into techwear is that most of them actually do care about the functionality and the quality of their pieces. And just taking one look at this lookbook here, I can definitely tell you that the quality is just not there. The materials look bad, the zipper quality looks absolutely horrendous, and the buckles look so fucking cheap, it's just rather sickening. And at this point, I'm really just kind of sick of making this joke, but once again, this is what you can usually expect out of a Korean techwear brand, and that's so fucking disappointing. You would think that from a country that is so notoriously just infamous for stealing other people's ideas and designs, that all these smaller techwear companies couldn't just go after 4Dimension and Issei, but nope, they gotta just pump out this shit instead. But moving on now to some lighter news, Naked and Famous just showed off their second collection of their Street Fighter collaboration, and once again, I really enjoyed it. Expanding on their first collection of denim, which was Ryu and Guile, they've now added 3 new characters in the form of M. Bison, Blanca, and Chun-Li, and honestly, I think all the detailing and comedic little aesthetics that made the first collection so good have come back in this collection. The embroideries are there again, the pocket liners are there again, the selvage lining and the colorways are there again, and then as far as quality goes, you know Naked and Famous denim is at least decent, so they have that going for them too. The only thing I really gotta say is kind of a negative on this collection is the shirting, because in all honesty, it does look a little bit cheap, and the embroideries they chose to use are a little bit more on the wonky side. But at the very least, if you're a really big fan of Street Fighter, I don't see this being that big of a problem to you. Then Nepenthes showed off their Spring Summer 2018 lookbook, and if you weren't convinced they weren't the masters of colors before, then now you definitely will. And before we get into the clothes themselves, let's just give a quick little round of applause to how fucking amazing this lookbook, just the lookbook itself looks. I mean, bravo fucking vo, guys. This is just... I could spend a long time looking at it. But then moving on to the collection itself, a lot of these pieces are just absolutely fantastic. And I mean, the amount of colors and different techniques and different styles and different patterns that Nepenthes uses here is really just an overload for pretty much any other brand out there that isn't named Nepenthes. And even though this collection does ring a little bit loud at some times, and I mean overly loud, obviously it's loud enough as is, Nepenthes still does a really fantastic job of melding colors and layering and textures and patterns together here into some really unique but still really cohesive outfits. So if you are looking for some very vibrant, some very bold, and some very explosively colorful contemporary wear to add to your newest collection, I don't see why you wouldn't start anywhere else but here. And lastly, Kapital showed off their newest Spring/Summer 2018 lookbook, and it's just as crazy and comedic as you'd expect it to be. For those of you unaware of how Kapital does their lookbooks, they're usually very large, full of crazy, just everything as far as clothing goes, and they usually like to add a little bit of comedy to it as well, and this lookbook is no different. But now moving on to the clothing themselves, there's everything you'd possibly expect from Kapital here and more. There's a plethora of different colors and styles and textures and fabrics. There's a slew of different sewing techniques, dyeing techniques, patchworking, embroidery, and graphics, and there's just a myriad of different design ideas that you really couldn't expect from anybody but the masterminds at Kapital. So I would honestly say, whether you're a fan of just fashion in general, fashion design, Japanese-inspired Americana, Japanese styling techniques, pretty much anything to do with fashion, then definitely check out this lookbook, and at the very least, you won't leave without at least a laugh or an inspirational idea. Alright, and finally, let's move on to our articles for the day. And first up, Grail put up another nice history of, this time, of legendary designer Nigel Cabourn. And honestly, if you're not familiar with his work, or definitely want to get to know a little bit more about him, I would definitely give this a read. Then the New York Times put out a nice, sweet little article on the now budding fashion and design scene coming out of Rwanda after dealing with their rather infamous past. So if you want to learn a little bit more about kind of what's going on across the pond, I definitely check this out. Then Corsi put out a very nice article called "In the Disposable Age, Luxury is Something Old, Worn, and Beautiful." And honestly, they kind of go into what makes a piece quality and what companies are doing quality pieces, and they go into a lot of denim, of course, and kind of how it's becoming revived once again after being, not super popular over the last half decade or so. So honestly, if you do consider yourself a fan of a lot more quality pieces and just kind of the nicer, better technically made pieces in the fashion industry, then this article is definitely for you. And lastly, Highsnobiety put out a very nice detailed article on the history of the newspaper print, and they go through obviously the history of it, as well as some of the designers that have used it over the years, and then where it's going to be going probably next, or what they think is next. And honestly, if you're a fan of fashion history and especially textile history, then I would definitely give this article a read as well. Alright dudes, and with that, we've reached the end of our whiff for the day and our last whiff of the week. And as always, I hope you guys have enjoyed. And also, as always, if you guys want to read any of the articles I talked about today, or see any more of the art or fashion lookbook photos I didn't include, I've linked everything in the description down below. And once again guys, if you are new to the channel, we do this What's Happening in Fashion 3 times a week, plus another special episode every here and there. So if you are a fan of these, definitely feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to hit me up in the comments down below, because I'm always willing to talk fashion. And with that guys, thank you once again for watching these videos and supporting this content. I hope you guys have a good couple days until I see you next. Enjoy your weekend, and as always, until next time.